A federal judge in Virginia ruled Monday that a key provision of President Obama's health care law is unconstitutional. Judge Henry Hudson in Richmond said the law's requirement that most Americans buy health insurance or face penalties exceeds the regulatory authority granted to Congress under the Common Clause. In a 42-page opinion, Judge Hudson wrote, "At its core, this dispute is not simply about regulating the business of insurance or crafting a scheme of universal health insurance coverage. It's about an individual's right to choose to participate." This is the third time a federal court has ruled on the constitutionality of the health care law, but the first time it's been ruled unconstitutional. There are some 24 lawsuits challenging the health care law around the country. The debate over the law is expected to end up before the Supreme Court. According to the New York Times, the rulings related to the legislation have split along political lines. The Times writes, quote, "Thus far, judges appointed by Republican presidents have ruled consistently against the Obama administration, while Democratic appointees have found for it." The judge in the Virginia case, Judge Hudson, was appointed by President George W. Bush. Hudson's the part owner of Campaign Solutions, a Republican consulting firm that's worked to oppose health care reform. Federal disclosures show he's earned up to $108,000 in dividends from his holdings in the firm since 2003. At the White House, Press Secretary Robert Gibbs told reporters he was confident of the law's constitutionality.
We're confident that it is constitutional, and quite frankly, of the three courts that have rendered decisions on this question, two have ruled in our favor. The Department of Justice obviously is going to have to make some decisions about appealing this particular case. My sense is that that appeal decision is something they'll likely make.
For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by John Walker, a writer and policy analyst for the website Firedog Lake. John Walker, welcome to Democracy Now! Explain what the judge ruled.
Well, the judge ruled that it was exceeding the powers of Congress, using the Commerce Clause, to force individuals to buy a service from a private entity. And so he only struck down the individual mandate provision in the law, which requires everyone who doesn't have insurance to purchase insurance from a private company.
And talk about the significance of this. By the way, how does it compare to, for example, when you buy a car, you have to have auto insurance?
Well, for one thing, that is a state law, so that actually doesn't have to do with the federal Constitution. That's a state-by-state law. And the other thing is, you don't have to own a car. You know, nothing's sort of forcing you to be the owner and driver of a car, as opposed to just living, which is the only requirement for you to be forced to buy insurance in the individual mandate. There is no way out of it. You know, this would apply to everyone. So it's sort of a taxation through a private entity, and that is what he said was an overstep of the Commerce Clause and the current powers of the Constitution.
And so,
and the effect it would have on the health care. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
The effect it would have on the health care bill, because he only struck down the individual mandate provision. There's a debate about how big people think that is. I always consider that individual mandate to be so much less than the actual cost of the health insurance that the impact I thought it would have was rather minor.
So talk about the ways, if the Supreme Court agreed, health care reform legislation could remain intact. How would it have to change?
As far as Judge Hudson's ruling, since he only struck down the individual mandate provision, everything else would remain in place. All the regulations, all the subsidies, all the expansion of Medicaid, all those remain in place. Many experts think you need something to cause people to buy insurance before they get sick. The loss of an individual mandate itself is actually not all that critical. There are other ways to achieve a similar function. You could have everyone automatically enrolled in some public program. You know, Medicare currently is constitutional, obviously. You could tax people, give them some basic health care, have them then get the option to buy private insurance if they wanted to. You could provide an open enrollment period for the insurance companies, so you could only buy insurance without paying higher rates at a certain time each year to prevent people from only signing up when they get sick. You could put in place some kind of back payment system or back premium payment system where if you go to sign up for insurance and you'd previously been uninsured, you have to pay the insurance company what's equal to 6 months of insurance premiums before they start covering you. So there's a bunch of walkarounds. If this is all that's ever dropped because it's unconstitutional, you should easily, if Congress is willing to, and that's a big political question, find a solution that would still make the bill work.
What if a public option had been part of this legislation that was passed, John Walker?
I think it would be very hard for him to reach this ruling because he said it was unconstitutional for the government to tell individuals they had to buy from a private entity. With a public option in there, the government would be actually saying you have to buy this item of the government or face a penalty. So I believe with the public option in there, it would have been constitutional. And you could even redesign the entire system with a public option so that instead of it being a fee for not having insurance, it's a general tax, provided the public option with the ability to then opt out for private insurance. Basically in the same way we run Medicaid right now. You can either get Medicaid or you can opt out into the private exchange, which is Medicaid Advantage.
I'm looking at the New York Times, which is talking about the Virginia Attorney General Kenneth Cuccinelli, who filed the lawsuit minutes after President Obama signed the law on March 23rd and has been discussing the case on cable television ever since. The Times writes, by late afternoon Monday, he'd already posted campaign fundraising advertisements online that cited his victory.
Yeah, this has become a real political hot potato. The interesting thing is many Republicans in the past have signed on to the individual mandate. Mitt Romney obviously had an individual mandate in his health care bill in Massachusetts. There was the Wyden-Bennett plan, which was a health care plan proposed a few years back. Had, I think, about 7 Republican co-sponsors in the Senate. There was the alternative to the Clinton health care plan back in the 90s, put forward by Republicans that also had an individual mandate in it. So the Republicans only really found their deep-seated opposition to it when it became Obama's individual mandate, and only started thinking it was unconstitutional when it was part of the Democrats' health care bill. So this entire time, this has been quite politicized, and it's no surprise to me that the 2 judges that found in favor of it were Democratic appointees, and this judge, Hudson, who is known to be a very conservative judge, appointed by Republicans, worked to advance Republican campaigns before getting on the bench, opposed it.
Well, let's talk about
declared it unconstitutional.
How the judge may benefit in various ways, including financial. The original piece appearing at Gawker.com, Henry Hudson, the federal judge in Virginia who just ruled on the health care reform bill, calling it unconstitutional, owns between $15,000 and $50,000 in a GOP political consulting firm that's worked against health care reform. His company, Campaign Solutions, a Republican consulting firm that worked this election cycle for John Boehner, John McCain, Sarah Palin, and others. Can you talk more about this, John Walker?
Yeah, he did own this company before getting on the bench, and he's continued to own it ever since. Some people would try to make the connection that he should have recused himself because his company did work with the Attorney General on his campaign. Basically, it just shows that he's a Republican operative and a Republican partisan.
And his firm worked against health care reform.
Yes, and his company worked against it.
And worked with, well, the incoming Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
Yeah, he's a Republican partisan that got put on the bench. This is sort of sadly what's been happening to our judicial system all over the place. Clarence Thomas's wife worked for a group that directly benefited from the Citizens United decision. This is unfortunately happening all over.
Well, John Walker, I want to thank you for being with us. That piece in Gawker also refers to the Huffington Post's earlier reportage on this, as well as Judicial Watch. John Walker is a writer and policy analyst for the website Fire Dog Lake. Thanks for being with us today on this cold day. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace